Hi, everyone. On today's episode, I had the privilege of getting to speak with Melissa and Rachel, two donor conceived people who are advocates for the donor conceived community through an organization called the U.S. Donor Conceived Council. Mel is one of the co-founders and now vice president of development for USDCC and was led to this type of work after finding out she was conceived from an anonymous egg donor just before turning 22. As she connected with more and more donor-conceived people, she noticed common threads that actually speak to a larger systemic issue within the fertility industry. Rachel is the marketing director of the U.S. Donor Conceived Council and is double donor conceived via anonymous egg and sperm donation and knew this since they were 7 years old. I am so grateful to Rachel and Mel for being willing to share their story and raise awareness to the voices of the donor conceived community, and thoroughly enjoyed learning more about what the USDCC is doing to advocate for various forms of important legislation when it comes to the fertility industry. It was so wonderful to hear all of these different types of perspectives about everything. And it is really, really important to listen to those who are donor conceived people. So please enjoy this episode. Me, you, and who? Who knew it would take more than 2 people to have a baby? In a world where infertility is no longer a taboo topic, this podcast will take you through all the different aspects of surrogacy and egg donation through the lens of many who walk this journey in different ways. My name is Whitney Hall, and I am a 2-time surrogate, now turned surrogacy coordinator for Egg Donor and Surrogate Solutions, the very agency I used when I chose to carry for 2 amazing families. With this podcast, it is our goal to help guide and support you as you learn about what it takes to grow a family in an alternative way, as well as hear inspiring and beautiful stories of how this path has changed lives forever. We can't wait for you to hear about just one more way happy families are created every day. Guys, thanks so much for being here.
Hi, Whitney.
Hey, Whitney. Super excited to be here.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So if you will, just for our listeners' sake, just say your name so they can match the voice. Go ahead, Mel.
All right. So my name is Melissa Bornico. I also go by Mel. I am the Vice President of Development and co-founder of the U.S. Donor Conceived Council. I'm a donor conceived person via egg donor.
Yay!
And I'm Rachel Schiff. I use they, them pronouns. I am the marketing director at the United States Donor Conceived Council, and I am a double donor conceived person, meaning that I was created with anonymous donor egg and anonymous donor sperm.
Awesome. Thanks, you guys. So I am so excited to talk with you guys today because in the world where I am, like we talk about donor conceived, like children and babies. And, I am sure, I am like 100% sure that I have probably met donor conceived people and either didn't know it or maybe even they didn't know it. Mm-hmm. But for our listeners, if you don't mind just sharing, you both have shared, you guys are donor conceived people, but you both have very unique stories. How can you share with us just how you learned about just that part of your story?
Yeah. Rachel, you want to start this one?
Yeah. I have a full twin also. So we found out at the same time. Because we were born in the early to mid 90s, our parents were told to probably not tell us, but we were told around the age of 7 that we were, miracle babies and we were made really special. And they gave us like the little kid version. And so they were like, keep it a secret. And I was like, absolutely not. That's really cool. So I ran around to like my first grade class being like, I'm special. My parents use donors. Had no clue what it meant. And everyone else is just
sure.
Everyone else is like, I am also 7 and I don't know what that means.
Love it. It's amazing how as children we just make things so uncomplicated.
Yeah, but I feel like I was sort of told earlier. So in terms of like my discovery and everything, it was really early on compared to a lot of other people who find out that they're donor conceived later in life.
Yeah. Mel.
I was one of those donor conceived people who found out later in life. So I was in my senior year of college. I was 21, like a few weeks shy of 22. And my mom called in. So I was raised with a brother, and I was raised by heterosexual parents. So, and my parents are still married. So very like nuclear household that we live in. My mom called a family meeting, which if anyone knows my family, we don't have family meetings. So
I was going to say, just that term feels daunting, right?
Yeah, it feels like something out of Full House, right? Where everyone hugs at the end. But we don't do that. So in my head, I'm like, okay, someone's dying. Just tell me who.
We don't do that.
Yeah. And so she launched into this explanation that I did not see coming. And it basically ended with, we used another woman's eggs to have you guys. Because I knew that they struggled with having kids for about 7 years. I just figured one day it like worked out for them. It never crossed my mind, the topic of donor conception. But it made a lot of sense. But at first I did think that she was messing with us. I was like, yeah, okay. And then she started getting a little upset. Like she started crying. And I realized that she wasn't messing with us. This was really happening. And, you know, it was hard to see her sitting there so vulnerable and so scared. But it made a lot of sense in a lot of ways. And it was also pretty shocking at the same time. So the sentence, "I'm not related to my mom," played on loop in my head for like the rest of the night. I was like, wait, what the hell? And it wasn't just, I'm not related to my mom. It was, I'm not related to that side of my family. But at the same time, it was also very clarifying because I never necessarily saw myself in my mom in the way that two people who are genetically related do. You know, like we got along and everything and we had things in common, but it was always like, I always describe it as, it's as if we were two women cast in a movie to play mother and daughter. So
interesting.
I love
yeah,
that.
like
That's
our
so
hair is
accurate.
kind of the same color, and like we both have blue eyes and stuff, but beyond that, there was really nothing that you would see in two people who are genetically linked through 50% of their DNA. And so that made a lot of sense. My brother also is like mysteriously taller than the rest of the family, so that that tracked, just stuff like that. So it was a very surreal experience, and there was a very long process of trying to come to terms with what that meant for not just where I was in my life then, but my entire life before that. But overall, I want to say that compared to a lot of donor conceived people, I had it really easy, you know, and not to like make it into a competition, but my parents told me themselves. They were remorseful for not telling sooner. They gave my brother and I space to kind of feel how we did about it instead of forcing us into this, okay, like we told you, now you have to feel okay about it. Like, you know, that we had permission to process it and come to terms with it as it related to us, you know? So
I love that.
Yeah, and all things considered, it went overall as well as it really could have. You know, of course, they could have done things better or differently sooner on. Like I should have known my whole life, right? Like I was lied to, but at the same time, I don't really hold it against them because, you know, they didn't have all the information that they needed as well. And so they also kind of deserve better in that sense.
Yeah. Well, and it really plays that, you know, that idea of then versus now. And, you know, it never is too late to tell. You know, of course, like we as an agency, and I know everything that DCC does is, you know, early and often and, you know, is kind of the best route. But just because you haven't yet doesn't mean that it, you know, can't be something that you do now. But you did mention, you know, like you said, your story, while traumatic in its own sense, you know, not to play that comparison game, but you hear those horror stories of donor conceived people's finding out about, you know, their genetic link in a plethora of pretty just shocking ways. And, you know, you get all documentaries and CNN articles and, you know, all kinds of things that come from it. So what is, I keep saying DCC, U.S. Donor Conceived Council. What?
You can say USDCC for sure.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
USDCC. But yeah, what, after obviously this being so, like, you, Mel, you found out about it so late. Rachel, you grew up knowing. So with those types of things, and then with, kind of some of the trauma that we, were talking about earlier, what does USDCC do as far as just supporting that, making people aware, just things like that?
Definitely. So when the U.S., I should probably start at our origin story, maybe a
do
little
it.
bit.
Yes, that's the beginning.
The U.S. Donor Conceived Council is the first completely volunteer-run, completely DCP-run nonprofit organization in the country that focuses specifically on advocacy and education.
DCP meaning donor conceived person.
Yes, sorry. Any acronyms that I forget to define, please interject. And so we started as sort of just an idea in 2021 where the founder of We Are Donor Conceived, Erin Jackson, she made a post in that group asking if anybody had experience with nonprofits because she was really looking to step up her advocacy. And I did have experience with stuff like that back from when I was in college. So I reached out to her, we got to talking. We scheduled a meeting with me, her, and two other people who are still on our board today. It was Jillian Phillips and Tyler Levy-Sniff. So they're still on the executive team today. And it really just started as the brainchild of Erin Jackson saying, there's no organization that's doing this specifically. There was already some advocacy work going on in the community, but nothing centralized. There was no organization yet. So we got to building that. And then we kind of just jumped into action from there. We incorporated as an official 501c3 nonprofit in January 2022. And right from there, a few months later, we passed the Donor Conceived Persons and Families of Donor Conceived Persons Protection Act in Colorado, which, among other things, required upon the donor conceived person turning 18, them being able to access identifying information about the donor. It required regular health updates of the donor. It put a global recipient family cap of 25 families per donor, which is different than live births. Recipient families, it caps it at the number of families who can be created from one donor. And within those families, they can have as many kids as they want, right?
Sure.
And so that's kind of what the kind of work that we do now is. We really try and get feedback from our community to help guide our efforts. Otherwise, why are we doing this, right?
Yeah.
And not just from donor-conceived people in our community, but parents and donors as well, because they also are stakeholders in this whole arrangement here. And they also could benefit from changes within this branch of medicine because there is a lack of regulation, right? Which is the whole reason why I got involved with this in the first place. But now, I mean, our goals really haven't changed very much. We're trying to advocate for donor-conceived people, help promote and support legislation that advances the interests of DCP and their families and protects their families. And really just trying to increase awareness because out of all of the social justice issues that are, happening in our world right now, this really sits at the intersection of all of them. And it also really hasn't hit the mainstream yet in terms of awareness. I always say, I didn't know what a donor conceived person was until I learned that I am one. So, and the same thing is similar for a lot of people. They've heard of donor conception before, but donor conceived people, that awareness has trailed behind a little bit. So we're trying to help close that gap. Rachel, what do you have to add? Rachel is one of just dominating the conversation here. Rachel is one of, I think you joined us about a year ago or within the last year.
I'm trying to think when we made that video together. I think that was just under a year. It was mid-May. We did a video together talking about being egg donor conceived. And so I really started to work with the USDCC at that point, just doing the video, talking about my experience. But even between then and now, I feel like my understanding of being donor conceived has still evolved and changed, even though it's been such a short period of time. Just working directly with the USDCC. Primarily, I'm focusing on social media and advocacy on that route. So, how to reach donor conceived people, what routes to take, stuff like that.
Yeah.
I was going to make a point and then I forgot. Let me think. Nope, sorry.
Well, let me
I lost
ask
it.
you.
Yeah.
That's okay. Let me ask you a question, Mel. So you're talking about that advocacy and the legislation and things like that. And obviously every donor conceived person's experience is unique and different to, just everyone's story is unique and different. What type, like, what is that advocacy? Why is that important to a donor conceived person? Because again, like, I know a lot of people think, okay, you have, people who want to have a baby and this is how they're going to do it. And then you see that baby and we're all so excited and happy. And then not a whole lot of people really think about, oh, well, it's, parents who love a baby or a parent who loves a baby. And, that's great. And you kind of don't necessarily think past that in some ways if you don't know about the industry. And you mentioned lack of regulation. Why is that important? What does that regulation look like? What is that advocacy?
So I always like to start off with this. Love and systemic harm are two completely separate things. My parents loved the hell out of me. Yes. I had an idyllic suburban childhood. Like, there's nothing that they could have done within their own power, really. I mean, like, besides like telling me sooner, but regardless, like, as far as like the problems I experienced due to being donor conceived, it had nothing to do with how much my parents loved me, right? So for example, like, there's no record keeping in the industry, and globally is a stronger word, but at least within this country, there's no like nationwide requirement to keep these long-term records about like how many live births were from one donor, like how many families received one donor, how many other clinics did this donor go to, and you can do your best to get that information, but a lot of things slip through the cracks, right? So I quite frequently, actually, I get friends of mine reaching out to me telling me that they saw someone who looked exactly like me.
Sure, we all play that doppelganger game.
Yeah. Except like as a donor conceived person, it's like
an
like
actual
that could
concern.
very well be
That's
a
a little scary. Yeah.
Like even just a few years ago, a friend of mine, he was working as a waiter, and he actually hadn't known that I was donor conceived yet. I just never came up, but he did message me saying, "Oh my God, I had a table yesterday and the woman at the table looked just like you." And then he goes, "Well, she could have been your mom, but," and then he goes on to be like, "Oh, the resemblance was exact." And I was just sitting there like, well, that very well could be the donor, or I get several people who are like, this girl, like, are you standing on the corner of like so-and-so street right now in Manhattan? And I'm like, definitely not. And they're like, "Oh my God, this girl looks exactly like you." And I'm over here like, I know that I was made at NYU fertility clinic, right? So and knowing that, donors aren't limited to one family usually, I could very well have siblings out there that I just don't know about. So there's nothing that my parents could have done, right, to prevent that. But that's something that, and I'm egg donor conceived, so we have way fewer siblings than people who are sperm donor conceived, for example.
I was gonna say,
imagine the paranoia when you're walking down the street and you like see someone who looks like you. You're constantly thinking, is that a sibling? Is that a relative? Could I accidentally date a sibling? And so you just never, even just the possibility that there are other people out there that are related to you and you'll never really know how many, that is more than enough to cause stress for a lot of donor conceived people.
Absolutely.
So and because that's just sort of allowed, right? It's going to keep happening unless we spread that awareness, unless we sort of take some kind of action to help donor conceived people, not at least future donor conceived people, not sort of have that exact experience, have a little bit better of an idea of, okay, I probably have this many siblings out there or so-and-so. So that's one example of the kind of advocacy that we do. Rachel, I feel like you had something that came to mind
I
while I was
did,
going through
yeah. I was gonna say, along with not just having updated records or having like a constant stream of information, I know for a fact that the information that I received was just completely wrong. Because I am double donor conceived, I
Oh.
have the fear that Mel's talking about, where I have to worry about both sides. I have to be like, are you my half sibling on a sperm side? Are you my half sibling on an egg side?
Sure.
I reached out to the clinic where my sperm donor came from, asking about the number of live births. And at this time, I know for a fact there are at least 22 of us stemming over 8 or 9 families. We don't know how many there are. And they came back saying there were under 5 live births.
Okay.
And so we're like, all right, we have to do this on our own because no one has the information that we
Yeah.
need. And we also don't know any sort of medical information that our donors may have found out later in life. I can tell you that I found out that when I did my 23andMe test, the first DNA test I did, I am a carrier for cystic fibrosis. And I wish I had known that sooner. Or I also found out that I have a genetic predisposition for alcoholism, which I also would have liked to know sooner. There's so many things. There's just so many things that, like, as I, got to connect with my siblings on both sides, but especially the egg side, because it is fortunately a little bit more finite and therefore easier to handle. There's so many medical things at the very least that popped up that I wish I could have known before I was in my late 20s. And I feel like that's also part of the work that we're doing, is just to make sure that future donor conceived people have access to accurate and updated medical information. So that way they can just be alive and be, happy and understand what's going on with their bodies.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, and it's interesting you brought up, you know for a fact that this particular clinic was incorrect with their assessment of that. One of the things, we as an agency, while, we really, really advocate for that idea of the known donor option on the egg donation side. I know that's not necessarily able to be available to everybody based off of certain laws and parentage laws and things like that. But as a DCP, why is that known donor portion of things so important?
For me, at least, when I was searching for the egg donor that my parents used, I just wanted to know who she was, right? I wanted to know what she was like. And obviously, I wanted the medical history as well. That was really important. And it was one of many things that I was looking for. Like, I really was curious to know, like, what she looked like. Because there are really no women in my family period that are related to me, at least, like, that I can look at and go, that's my face, and just I kind of like internet like crept on her a little bit before I actually contacted her, as you do. I learned a lot of things about her just from that, like how, like, a lot of shared interests that we have, a lot of like just the ways that our brains work and the ways that, like, we talk about things. She's very nerdy, very, like, really liked writing, kind of artistic, but also sciencey. And I was like, wow, that's me. And that was just really cool. And it wasn't because I wanted, like, a replacement mommy, right? That was never, that mindset was never part of it. I just was really curious about her to understand more about myself. And I kind of wanted to know if I did have other siblings out there too, because I thought that would be kind of cool. I've yet to find any. It doesn't mean they're not out there. It just means that I haven't found any. So that's where I'm at right now. On the plus side, like, I've never really had the grief of thinking, oh, I've been robbed of all this time with someone. But really, and I see that in a lot of donor conceived people too. Like, they just want to understand more about themselves. Like, they're not looking to, like, fill a missing void of, like, I never, like, I want you to be my parent and, like, play dolls with me or something, like. that's that's not the mindset. Like, it's really just to learn more about yourself. And Rachel, I see you nodding your head.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to generalize every single donor conceived person. There may be
absolutely
like
this
that.
Is everyone's story is unique, and
so everyone's story is
just
unique.
Your story.
Yeah, I just want to say that because I feel very similar to Mel, but I just want to make sure that we note that like not every donor conceived person's gonna think like we are. Because I was also raised by two heterosexual parents, man, woman. I feel similarly in that while I had my parents who loved me and took care of me and everything, I still feel like having that genetic mirror and just having, like Mel said, that understanding of who you are from just understanding where you come from. Especially, I was always really curious, like, oh, between me and my twin, we're both left-handed. We both really like French. We both really like cats for some reason. And a lot of these things come from, I use the term biomom,
Okay.
Yes, I use the term biomom because in my mind, genetically, the woman is my genetic mother. I don't call her mom. I do just use her name, but when describing her to other people, I use that term. And that's just something that I'm going to do. That doesn't also mean that, every donor conceived person is going to use that term.
Absolutely.
But with that in mind, I'm like, I was able to meet her last year and I was like able to see, I remember we were like sitting at a coffee shop and we're both left-handed. And so we were both like drinking our coffee with our left hand and like having our phone in our right. And I like looked at her and I like saw myself in her face. And I was like, I'm able to have a genetic mirror with a parent for the first time at 28, which I feel like no one should really have to go through. And then
so, yeah.
with the time of loss too. Sorry. I was just going to say, like, with the feeling of loss and grief with time, I feel like even though I was told early on, I have one donor conceived sibling who's on the egg side, and then our bio mom has two raised children. So there's three on that side.
Sure.
My half sibling on that side, she was searching for so long compared to me. Like, she found out later. She has her whole story, which is also completely different from mine. And so when we connected, it was like instantaneous friendship, which I loved. And we got to hang out a bunch. And, even though we've been able to spend all this time together and we text all the time, every time we see each other and then we leave, we're both just like hit with a pang of like sadness of like, oh, I feel bad that we have to leave because we've only been getting to know each other for 2 years now. And we should have been getting to know each other since we were 0.
Yes.
And it's weird to have that with a sibling.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. Yeah, there's the obvious, like, everybody should just be able to know their medical history or have access to that for very clear, obvious reasons of, just how are you going to navigate life on the bodily health side of things. But both of you have talked about this knowing of yourselves, and that doesn't take away from the beautiful nurture of your parents, but it is that knowing, yourselves. I mean, I like the only thing that I can think of relating this to, and it's a very loose relation, is that sense of, children who are adopted and wanting to know just that history. And not because they don't love the parents that have raised them, but just because they want to know a little more. Like you said, you're left-handed, you like cats, those things are fun. Like, it's fun to figure those things out. No, that's absolutely beautiful. So as far as, I know you said, Rachel, you have that kind of sense of lost time, if you will, with a sibling. What does USDCC do as far as coming alongside donor conceived persons and giving them that support as well as, Mel, you had said your parents and likely yours, Rachel, were either probably told to not say anything or didn't have the resources to say anything. What does that look like for, those parents who are about to go down this road, going down this road? I know you have so many people who are like, we are just trying to have a baby. We can't even get to this part yet. What does
You
that
have
look
to,
like?
though. That's the only
Yeah.
thing. It's like, you have to think about your child at like all stages of life. I feel like, as you were saying in the beginning, a lot of it's about like, you have a baby, yay, baby, but then baby grows up. What happens
Yeah.
when baby grows up? And baby is now not baby. I feel like so many people
Yeah.
think about donor conception as children, but then when you
Yes.
grow up as a donor conceived adult, there's really no like narrative about this. Like, I look
Mm.
online, I'm finding no research about donor conceived adults. I'm finding no information in terms of how we're supposed to navigate things like marriage and kids and just like how
Yeah.
to again navigate through life, but like with this sort of very unique perspective and this very unique way to go through things. And I feel like that's what the USDCC is doing in terms of trying to go alongside with the donor conceived. I don't want to say like parties, but the different generations that we have. Like, we're not the oldest generation of donor conceived people at all. There are
Mm-mm.
people who are what, like 20 or 4, I don't want to age anyone,
Oh,
but
I know DCP who are in their 70s.
yeah, like
Yeah.
we're all trying to do this for the first time. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, it's just like it's hard and it's scary and it's complicated. And having a group of people to be like, hey, we are also going through this. We have, some, I mean, Mel can definitely talk about the resources more than I can, but I feel like that's at least a very large stakeholder of the USDCC is like, we're all scared and confused and we're doing this for the first time.
Well, and there should you are all scared and confused, and there shouldn't be trauma around that story, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it should we're the idea is, again, our agency is so much early and often, and I
Mm-hmm.
know, like, I am mostly play a role in surrogacy land, and so it's still like, hey, this is still part of your kiddo's story, and like
Mm-hmm.
it's fun and beautiful, and it's just factual, and
Mm-hmm.
and that kind of thing, and there shouldn't be that trauma, but you guys are paving that way, having to, you are the ones that did experience that trauma. And so what does it look like to make it more conversational and part of the story, and just the 7-year-old going around in the classroom saying, hey, I'm donor conceived, and other 7-year-olds actually being able to be like, oh, I know what that means. I read it in this
Mm-hmm.
book, or, like things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Another thing that we really, as far as like our advocacy work goes, so as far as identifying information and our
Yeah.
advocacy work, the way they overlap is a main tenet of our advocacy goals is to get ID release at 18. That's not because 18 is quote unquote the best age to learn who the donor is. Ideally,
Sure.
like the earlier someone has access to that information about themselves, like if that can happen, then even better. The reason we work with the ID release at 18 is because of the shoddy patchwork of parentage laws in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
And especially for queer families and same-sex couples, we really you just cannot threaten that legal parent-child relationship.
Right.
That
So
also is
sorry, and I don't mean to jump all over you, but for those who don't know, every
Mm-hmm.
state has different parentage laws, and especially for LGBTQ, not every state will recognize both parents as parents and will
Yep.
do the parent that is genetically linked, and the other parent has to adopt, and there's all kinds of parentage issues. And so, Mel, what you're saying is if you introduce the genetically linked person into the category as far as them being known, then you have issues of the parent, the actual parent, and by actual parent I mean the one that is creating this family via donation, being recognized as the parent of the donor conceived person.
Yeah,
I
or
danced
it
around that.
could, yeah,
Yeah.
it totally, it could lead to a lot of the time it's fine. And a lot
Yeah.
of and sometimes it's not. And so we just don't want to threaten that family stability
Mhm.
for obvious reasons. That's just a terrible thing for a family to experience. And also that also is not helpful for the donor conceived person as well. So that also, that, that also plays a role in protecting donor conceived people and is their relationship with their parents. And so, but of course, there are other ways to get information about yourself and who you are and your relatives in besides just known donation from birth. So if that's not an option for your family, we do encourage just, being as open as possible with your child. And that doesn't just mean telling them that they're donor conceived, but helping them explore that side of themselves and their origins and their families. It could be connecting them with siblings. It could be, taking a DNA test with them to see if you can find other relatives, or it means something different to every family. And the goal of that, the ultimate goal isn't one specific thing. For example, like known donation, the ultimate goal is giving the DCP as much choice as they can to know information about themselves, because a lot of these decisions are made on the donor conceived person's behalf before they even exist, and also with the mental image of them as a child, as a baby. And so where we come in is helping to demystify some of that limited perception of the DCP and help give them that autonomy back by, helping their parents understand why they may or may not want to know information about themselves, and that it doesn't mean that they're any less of a parent because of that. So,
yeah. Oh, I love that. I love that so much. What would you say are maybe some of those common myths that you have experienced either as DCPs or in your work through advocacy that you would want to bust?
Bingo card.
As far as like knowing the donor goes, or because there's a lot of different routes.
There's so many routes, right? There's a lot of routes. I mean, honestly, let's open the can of worms. Like, I think, let's say this. I know, like, again, and I keep kind of going to surrogacy, but like when people think surrogacy, they think the clickbait on People magazine, they see those scary stories and they think that that's common, and that's the generalization, right? So donor conceived people, a lot of times I was texting a couple of friends, last night, and I was like, you guys, I just realized this, and this, and they're, only avenue of knowing about donor conceived people is the Netflix documentaries and things like that. Yeah. So like, what are kind of those myths as far as just all of it across the board? Pick
The
your
first
fave.
the first one that comes to mind is that whenever we reach out to our donors, I don't know why people think that we want money, and I don't know where that comes from. I mean, if we want to talk about like repercussions for trauma, I would love it, but that's not going to come from my donor. That's going to come from the industry, and I can give them my cash app. But I don't know why people just like, there's some reason there's like, oh, you want money or you want something, and it's like, no, I don't. Where'd you get that from? Like, I don't know why that's a first assumption. I personally have not experienced it from the families of my donors, but I can say that ideally, most of the time, what people want when they reach out is just like basic information, not like, be my parent, be this, like, be a very important role in my life considering I just met you.
Yeah.
Whitney, something you said before came to mind first was the hyper focus on getting the baby and then worrying about the donor conceived person experience stuff after that. A big misconception is that it's best to just take care of all the DCP experience stuff after the baby is born. And sometimes, like it's not impossible to manage that order. But a lot of the time I'll have conversations with parents who I used to be the director of social media. I've handed that off to someone who is much better at it than I am. But I would, a lot of the time during my run as director of social media, I would get messages from parents, and it would sort of take the same structure of hello, my baby is donor conceived. I'm just now finding your page. I didn't know any of this beforehand, that they might want to know the donor, that yada yada yada. And a lot of the time you could almost like hear the panic coming through the message, because they're scared that they like ruined everything for their child. And it's just, it breaks your heart to see a parent so afraid of like messing something up. And when your main your only focus with your child should be helping to raise them, not worrying that like you made an irreversible wrong decision, quote unquote. But if for parent, and I've had that conversation with parents who are in the phase of finding a donor, and I would say like, hey, like if you ever have questions about like donor conceived people, here's my card. And they'd say like, oh, we don't even have the baby yet, like we'll worry about that when and you see them like, and I you can all, like you can't interfere with how people build their families or anything, but a lot of the time I try and say like, a lot of parents sometimes like have that same mindset, and then later on they wish that they would have asked questions before starting the process too. So there's no wrong time to get this information, but if you find yourself in a position where you're looking for a donor and you're looking to build your family through egg donation, and you're not hurting yourself by asking questions now about donor conceived people. It seems hard to picture that far down the line, but it really might help guide some of your decisions as you're navigating this totally unprecedented process, where you probably have a million questions already.
Yeah. What would you say, or maybe what would be those questions that those parents should be asking?
Yeah, like even just general, what do donor conceived people want? And that could have a million different answers to it, right? Or, do donor conceived people, there's no like question that's too basic. For some people, it could even just be like, will my kid have other siblings? Like it could be very basic stuff, because a lot of people, they don't learn about this stuff until they find themselves in this world, myself included. So really any question that crosses your mind about donor conceived people, ask it. And in addition to asking questions, just seek out that perspective of donor conceived adults, because they really are the biggest resource for that firsthand experience of being a donor conceived person, that really will help you understand your child or your future child experiences a little bit better.
Yeah. What does USDCC do to advocate that seeking out of other adults, creating that community? I know, donor sibling registry is kind of the one of the big ones. And I know it's not, it's as best as we can do so far. I know there's more things to come, and things will continue to get better as this becomes more of a thing. But what is USDCC doing to make that possible?
So that's separate from the USDCC.
Right.
So the USDCC doesn't necessarily like endorse or like partner or sponsor like one particular organization, but for some parents, helping connect their child to other relatives could mean signing up for the donor sibling registry, or for DCP data, the other registry that just launched recently. For some parents, that means helping their kid take a DNA test. And each of these options have their own limitations and their own benefits, right? So there's no necessarily one correct route, but really letting your child take the lead as far as like what how much interest they want to take, how many questions they want to take, and just always letting them know that it's okay, whatever they choose to do, or however much importance they assign to this in their life, and helping remind them that, like, you know, you're there to support them. Also, the USDCC regularly puts out educational materials for every different audience in the donor conceived space, but also including parents. We also recently put out an analysis of sperm banks in the US to kind of verify or vet different policies that they abide by in their practice, and sort of I don't want to say rating them or ranking them, but sort of quantifying what types of policies they abide by, and as that relates to what's important to people within this space. So that can be found on our website, the Stoplight Chart, and that has gotten a lot of positive feedback from parents. And we're doing our best to continually update it as things change and as time moves forward. So so we're really trying to educate parents as much as we can right now, when they have questions about anything in this space, as well as also donors too. Donors, you know, also have their own set of questions, their own set of curiosities. So just really trying to help everybody who is involved in the process of making donor conceived people to help give that future DCP their best shot.
I mean, the biggest thing that I'm hearing is, you know, what you had said previously, Mel, of giving the donor conceived person agency in deciding their path of learning about those genetic links. And it is different and unique for everyone. But if those parents, or, you know, the people in their tribe, in their village, can have those resources, be there to support them, I mean, that's just the most important thing.
Exactly, too. And I always like to reiterate that it's impossible to know everything or know how to handle every situation that's going to come up, just like parenting in general, right?
Absolutely.
You know, I'm not a parent, but based on what my parent friends and people in my life say is like, it's a minefield. And, you know,
100%.
And so as far as like, okay, what can parents do to prepare for like having a donor conceived? There's no like checkbox that's going to tell you when you've learned everything, because you can't. The process of having a family built through donor conception is a lifelong decision. And along with that, learning about donor conception and about donor conceived people and about your donor conceived child is also going to be a lifelong process. So it's going to be interwoven with your life for years to come. And the beautiful part is you don't have to know everything, and it's impossible to know everything. So cut yourself some slack, listen to your kid, give them space. If, you know, like if you end up making a mistake, just like, you know, apologize to your kid if, you know, you make a wrong decision, and then you move forward with it. Right. It's not about doing everything right. It's about acknowledging their autonomy. Like you said, Whitney.
I love that. So what would you say, you know, you said USDCC tries to all realms, whether it's the donor conceived person, the parents, and the donors themselves. What would you say to any potential donor from the perspective of a DCP?
So I'm going to tell a short story about when I first reached out to my bio mom / my parents' donor. So I, you know, between learning I was donor conceived and learning who the donor was, that took about 8 months. Okay. Between learning who the donor was and then contacting the donor, that took about 3 years. And I was so hesitant about reaching out, because you just hear all these horror stories of donor conceived people reaching out to the donor and getting like just having their motivations completely misunderstood and twisted around, and just they end up feeling villainized. They end up feeling like accused of trying to disrupt someone's life or their family. And, you know, they're not trying to do any of that, right? Like a lot of the time, like, yeah, it would be cool to like be friends with this person and talk to them and all this stuff. But, you know, even just like that, if that is failed to be given to them, the thing that hurts them the most is not being understood why they're reaching out in the first place. At least that's what I've seen. And that's what was going on in my head when it took me so long to reach out. So one day, I just, decided that, and not to be morbid, but God forbid this woman dies in a car accident next week. Like, and I didn't want to be in this position where I could have reached out and then I lost my opportunity because life happened, right? So I just sat down one day and I basically wrote this long message that was like, you don't know me, but I think you were my parents' egg donor. Like, just so you know, I'm not looking for money. I'm not looking for you to be my mommy. Like, I, would be happy to talk to you if you are, yada, yada, yada. And I pressed send. And she got back to me the next day and she said, okay, this isn't exactly going to be a short conversation. Do you have time for a phone call? And right in that moment, I knew I had the right person because that's some crap that I would respond with, just very matter of fact, like, all right, let's get on the phone. And so
let's not dance. We're going to get this done.
Yeah, she was just kind of like, all right, then what's your number? And our first conversation, it went overall as well as it really could have, like, which is the common theme in this journey of mine. But it was, she answered my question. She gave me her family medical history. She told me about like her relatives, like her dad was a literal rocket scientist for NASA. I'm like, well, that explains why I'm such a freaking nerd. And she told me some cool information, like apparently we're descendants of the Wright brothers. So that was pretty cool.
Very cool.
And just stuff like that. And she even said on her own, without me even like asking about it, like, she's like, it's my ethical duty to give you health information. It was just a no-brainer for her. So that was a relief to not have to explain to her why I needed it and why it was kind of like, it was her ethical duty, at least in my opinion. And then towards the end, at the end of our phone call, when we were wrapping up, I asked her if I was like, can I ask you something? And I said, were you surprised to hear from me, kind of? And she took a moment. And she said, let's put it this way. I probably wasn't as surprised to hear from you as you were to find out you were donor conceived. And that empathy meant so much to me. Like it was such a relief to have that conversation that was like, she's trying to look at it from my perspective. She understands why I'm reaching out. She understands why the reasons that I'm not, the incorrect reasons of me reaching out. And she doesn't think that that's why I'm doing it. That was not English, but that's the best I could say it. And just, that element of like, what does this mean for her was such a relief. It was like a weight off my shoulders because that fear of being misunderstood and having to explain to somebody and defend this objectively innocent position of just wanting to know more about yourself. Like that was the main reason why I spent so long, like, without reaching out. I just didn't have the emotional capacity to be villainized like that, and just that it didn't happen. And and we don't talk a whole lot now. I don't think we've talked in a couple months, and that's fine, right? Like we're both adults now, so it's this feeling of like, what do I do with you, kind of. And just, I'll never forget how that first conversation went, and that's something that I'll always be grateful for, because I was so vulnerable when I reached out to her. And so that's something that I'm always really thankful for. And if donors can take away anything from that story, it's just do your best to look at it from the perspective of the person who's contacting you, because it probably took a lot for them to reach out.
I love that.
I love all of that, because I feel like that's so similar to my experience with my bio mom as well. Although our timelines are really different, because from me doing the DNA test, finding my half sister was about 2 minutes. She is a medical researcher, and she is also very into understanding people and finding people. So it took us, I want to say, a month and a half, not even, to find out who our donor was. And then it took us about another 2 weeks to convince ourselves that it really was her. And then it took us another week to write the message. But it was co-signed by myself, my full twin, and her. And we had sent it to her on Facebook, because we were like, we don't know her email, we'll send it through Facebook. It took her about a month to get back to us, because when you message someone on Facebook and you don't have any mutual friends, it goes into your requests and no one knows how to access it and whatever. So it took her so long to get back to us, but she was so open to communicating. She was like, "You obviously have so many questions. Here's my medical info." She sent us photos, and we went back and forth with emails. It went on for months. We all have each other's numbers, et cetera, et cetera. But what Mel was saying really reminded me of one conversation that she had with me and my half sister, where she was saying, "I'm so saddened by the thought that you only had one opportunity to reach out to me, because we had spent so much time poring over the email, making sure that we weren't misunderstood in terms of what we were trying to get." And she was similarly empathetic in that, you shouldn't really only have one chance to reach out to your genetic parent. And so, similarly, being open to connection, but then also just, I feel like having that continued back and forth and not feeling like, oh, I have one chance to get this right. Otherwise, that's it. I feel like going through donating with the lens of sort of, if you do have a donor conceived child or adult reach out to you, they're going to be feeling so many things. I feel like when we did it, my fear was just ultimate immediate rejection, because we didn't know who she was. We didn't know, if she was like a safe person for me who's gender fluid. You have no clue who the donor is. And so you want to make sure that safety is paramount for yourself, but then also just for your relationship. And so I feel like for donors, understanding who the donor conceived person could be, I feel like it's really important when it comes to understanding like who you're going to be doing this for, why you're donating. Like, what's the why?
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Well, you guys, I so appreciate you being vulnerable with your own personal stories. Your story, you were not obligated to tell that to, anybody. And so I appreciate you guys being vulnerable and using your own stories as a platform to just educate others. And I'm so grateful for USDCC and everything that they are doing to champion and bring to life, just the advocacy that is needed for the donor conceived people. So thank you guys so much. I have one final question. And it's a fun one for anyone who knows me. They know that I have a very codependent relationship with coffee. And so I love to ask the question, what filled your cup this morning? So literally or figuratively, what filled your cup?
Besides the iced coffee that I've been sipping this whole hour that we've been talking, I want to say every time we get a message from someone saying, "I found your page and it helped me," whether it's a donor conceived person, a donor, a parent, just knowing that, we cast those little ripple effects and that it will help somebody and help that person help somebody. That's what always fills my cup.
I love that. What about you, Rachel?
Ooh, I also had iced coffee with caramel creamer, but similarly, I have gotten messages from people after I do podcasts like this. Because I'm double donor conceived, I feel like there's so few of us comparatively, even within the donor conceived industry, including myself and my twin. I know of 6 people, and 2 are babies, so I don't really count them yet. But I've had people reach out to me saying, "I heard this and my child is double donor conceived." And I'm like, great. I love that they exist. Thank you for making them exist. Like, the fact that there's just someone who can, I don't want to be like, look up to me. I'm double donor conceived and I'm an adult. But at the same time, when I was growing up, I had no one in terms of understanding what double donor conception is, what donor conception is. And I feel like being able to, show to your kid, look, there's an adult who's just like you and they're okay. I feel like stuff like that just really fills my cup, and it's really sweet.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's just that awareness for everything, right? Oh, I love that. Well, you guys, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for everything that you do. We will have your website in our show notes, and just all of those things. So I'm so grateful for you both. So thank you.
Thank you, Whitney. And thank you for using your platform to promote DCP voices. We love that.
I love
We love
that.
to see it.
Yeah.
Thanks, you guys. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. Egg Donor and Surrogate Solutions proudly supports the mission and efforts of the USDCC and their work around advocacy for donor-conceived people. The USDCC strives to increase awareness of the needs, interests, and challenges of donor-conceived people and advance change that promotes and protects their health, welfare, and human rights. Our vision for a better future for donor-conceived people begins by prioritizing the best interests of the DCP in all matters involving donor conception. We are grateful for their work to help close the gap in education around the needs of those conceived through egg donors and sperm donors. In 2017, Egg Donor and Surrogate Solutions eliminated the characterization of egg donor cycles as anonymous and now, at minimum, facilitate unidentified cycles. We do not require each donor to have a personal relationship with a donor-conceived child. However, we do expect each donor to be willing to converse via a private forum like the Donor Sibling Registry or other like programs to update medical information and answer medical questions. Additionally, a donor should be willing to engage with a donor-conceived child or person around questions about oneself, family changes, personalities, or general curiosity questions they may have due to shared DNA. This does not mean a donor is required to release contact information or build a personal relationship. Egg Donor and Surrogate Solutions is in support of the goals of mandatory ID release at the age of 18 for egg donors and of intended parents being transparent and open with their future child regarding their story. Egg Donor and Surrogate Solutions also offers a known donor program for intended parents and egg donors who would like to build a relationship from the beginning in order to have easy, open dialogue with a child one day about their story. To learn more about this program, please go to the link in the show notes. Thank you.